Cognitive psychology investigates how information is processed in the brain using many different mental processes such as memory, perception, and attention. When researchers perform investigations and studies, there are a few ethical guidelines that they have to abide by. Ethics refers to the correct rules of conduct necessary when carrying out research. The guidelines are set up by either the American Psychological Association or by the British Psychological Society. The guidelines are there to protect the participants from being harmed in any way during the investigation. As there are very many rules of what the researcher can or cannot do, the main ones are the ones that will be focused on in this movie. But firstly, the 6 most common are informed consent, debrief, protection of participants, deception, confidentiality, and withdrawal from an investigation. The two-factor theory of emotion was developed by Schachter and Singer. It states that emotion develops from a stage of arousal and a cognition that makes the best sense of the situation the person is in. For example, it explains that when people become aroused, they look for cues as to why they feel that way. They used 184 male college students. They were deceived into believing they were testing the effect of vitamin injections on visual skills. There were 4 conditions: adrenaline ignorant, adrenaline informed, adrenaline misinformed, and a control group. The participants were then placed in either euphoria condition, where a confederate encouraged the participant to play with office materials in the waiting room, or in the anger condition. The confederate carried out tasks in order to annoy the participant. The results showed that in the euphoria group, the happiest group was the misinformed group, and the least happy group was the informed group. The anger condition showed that the ignorant group felt the angriest, and the least angriest was the informed group. Deception was one of Schachter and Singer's ethical issues, as they told their participants the experiment was for something else, and also the adrenaline shots could harm the participants. In 1964, Spiesman performed an investigation in which the aim was to investigate whether different appraisals in the form of soundtracks of a movie will influence the emotion experienced by participants viewing the film of a boy being circumcised. 100 male participants were used and they were placed into 4 conditions: intellectualization condition, denial, trauma, and asylum. This study breaks many ethical considerations. Firstly, the participants were put in an unpleasant situation as they were not sure of the nature of the movie. The content also made a lot of difference as the participants were made uncomfortable as the movie was very traumatic. This also causes a problem with informed consent. The participants did consent to being in the investigation, but as they did not know the true nature of the movie, they could not consent to that. The HM case study is an important breakthrough for science in order for researchers to gain knowledge about the human brain. At the age of 7, HM fell off his bike and damaged his head. Shortly after that, he began to have epilepsy attacks. At the age of 27, he had become incapacitated by his seizures and couldn't lead a normal life. No medication helped. With consent from HM and his family neurosurgeon, William Scoville performed an experimental surgery where he removed tissue from the medial temporal lobe on both sides of HM's brain. This later resulted in amnesia, and HM could never remember a new day in his life. Many researchers have been with HM during his life and studied him and his behavior, but since he couldn't remember anyone new that entered his life, how ethical was it really? In this study, HM had been informed of the situation and nobody withheld information before the operation. Nobody knew though that the operation would cost him his memory, but he had given his consent. There was no deception before the information, but afterward. Even though doctors were seen to always be correct and put above others, this wasn't the intended outcome of the operation. All researchers were very meticulous when they studied HM in this longitudinal study to be ethically correct when protecting the participants. And while it might have worked, HM later became the target of many different experiments. Since he couldn't remember anything, there really wasn't any point in debriefing him. Many researchers experimented on him since he wasn't able to remember anything of it afterwards, and that made him an interesting subject. He became an experimental animal for all researchers who wanted to study him and his brain, and this is of course extremely unethical. He lived in a home where he was taken care of, but he had no privacy. This study was also unethical since no one knew the consequences going into the operation, and since HM was hurt, he could no longer produce any new memories or remember anything he was told. As we have now shown you, the main ethical issues regarding the cognitive level of analysis were deception, which all the 3 studies mentioned were victims of. All these experiments were made in a time where ethics was many times disregarded, and many of them would not be approved today because of their unethical ways.
Created using Powtoon.